We saw in the email, but today she's not feeling too hot. You know, it's that third day after going to sleep and waking up. So she's a little uncomfortable today, but everything looks like it's going to work out on that. Anyone else on the sick injured list that we need to keep in our prayers? Lisa Wright. Anyone else? I'm sorry? Emma, having a problem with her Crohn's disease, so keep her in your prayers. Yes, ma'am. Okay, that was your Bob Getty, and that's your niece's husband. Okay. Had some issues in the hospital and now has COVID, so keep him in your prayers. Brother Bobby, would you lead us in a prayer before we begin class, please? Amen. I'm going to do just a little bit of history review here just to make sure we're all on the same page, since I hadn't taught in a few weeks. So mainly to make sure I know where I am and we're all together. Brother Terry had been teaching, and we're getting to a section now that can be confusing if we're not real careful, because Jehoshaphat was the king of which area? Northern kingdom or southern kingdom? Israel or Judah? Jehoshaphat. Judah, south. He has a son that is called Jehoram, and also Jehoram is a name that can be either Jehoram or Joram, and he co-reigns with Jehoshaphat during part of the time that we're going to be talking about today, which makes it confusing because today we're going to be talking about Joram or Jehoram, who is the king of the north. So at this particular time in history, we have a southern king and a northern king that's both referred to as Jehoram or Joram. So we need to, it's going to be difficult to try to keep those separate. And the time frame that we're looking at is around 853 to 842 or so BC. And Jehoram, the one that we're going to be looking at today, or Joram, that is king of Israel, king of the north. If we look at chapter 3 of 2 Kings, it says, "Now Jehoram, the son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel in Samaria the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and reigned 12 years. Now, Jehoshaphat co-reigned with his father. And then in the 18th year of his reign, Joram of Israel became king of Israel. He also co-reigned, or his son Jehoram co-reigned with him starting in 853 BC. And if we look at the 18th year, it would be 852 when Joram of the north became king. I know I'm confusing you, but if we just take the timeline and look at it, Jehoshaphat was king for a total of 25 years. He co-reigned some with his father. Then his son co-reigned with him. Now, during the time that his son co-reigned with him is when the Jehoram of the north became king at that time. Does that make sense, or am I just confusing you that much more? So I'm going to attempt every time I use the word Jehoram or Joram to say it's either north or south. And if I get it mixed up, just help me out, okay? Questions, comments so far now that I've got you totally confused? Okay. If we look at the question, bought me a new pair of readers and can't read them. They work close, but they don't work at the distance, so I messed up. Okay. We're going to be looking at chapter 3 and chapter 4 of 2 Kings. And starting in chapter 3, the first question on the book is, Joram was the son of whom, and what was his brother's name? And if we just start with chapter 3 and look at it, it says Jehoram, the son of Ahab. So he's the son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel in Samaria the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. He reigned 12 years. And he wrought evil in the sight of the Lord, but not like his father and like his mother, for he put away the image of Baal that his father had made. Nevertheless, he cleaved unto the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which made Israel to sin, and he departed not therefrom. Question number 2 is describe his religious policies. So if we just look at those verses and what we've already studied up to this point, what were his religious policies or actions, and we'll separate that into 2 parts. Part number 1 is that he did not do like his father or his mother. Who was his father? Verse 1. Ahab. Who was Ahab married to? Jezebel. Who was Jezebel? What was her lineage? What country did she come from, or what country is she associated with? She was a Phoenician, which puts her in Baal worship. When Ahab married her, he then created Baal statues and set up Baal religion. So when his son Joram became king, he did away with Baal worship. Part 1. Part 2 is in verse 3. He cleaved unto the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. What did Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, do? When they first set up the northern kingdom, Israel, Jeroboam did not want the people to go to Jerusalem or to Judah to worship because they might turn back to that. So he set up an entire religion based primarily on the true religion. He set up all kind of idols and offerings and worship periods and such to mirror but not be the true religion. And what was the idols that he made and put in 2 locations? Golden calves. He went all the way back to the golden calves like they had used, like Aaron had made in the book of Exodus when the people wanted to return to Egypt. So he made the golden calves and set up that religion. So here Jeroboam did away with Baal worship, but he didn't bring the people back to the true religion. He brought them back to the worship that had been set up by Jeroboam, which was still a false religion. Questions, comments? Terry, am I hitting pretty close to on point? Okay. Anything else on that section? You know, that is an excellent question. Why was he so blind that he couldn't see the truth? If he's going to go halfway, why not go all the way? Let's bring that up to modern day and look at the world outside this building and outside, well, even some congregations of the Church of Christ are not really congregations of the Church of Christ anymore, are they? Why are there over 10,000 religious groups in the United States today that profess to base their religion on the Bible and Christ? They don't see the truth, or they see it and ignore it, correct? So I don't know. Years and years ago, our young folks was going to have a gospel meeting, and the elders had asked some input from the congregation, and they mentioned a name that we wasn't familiar with, but he was a professor down at Faulkner at the time, and so we made an appointment to talk to him. Hit me with his name. It's been so long I can't remember his name. Anyway, we had lunch with him and talked to him, and he had been a Baptist preacher. He was in the Marines, and part of his thing was, while he was in the Marines, he would preach on occasions, and he was a Baptist preacher. And he made a very interesting comment. He's teaching at Faulkner now, and he is a Christian. And his comment was, when we asked him, well, if you was a Baptist preacher, why are you now associated with the Church of Christ? And he says, I taught myself out of the Baptist church. Instead of following their doctrines in his preaching and his study, he literally used the Bible and studied himself out. He saw the light. Why do so many people, how many times have you talked to somebody that's not a Christian and have them read a passage and they say, well, I know what that says, but. Yeah, but. There shouldn't be a but. If the scripture says it, why? And I can't answer your question why he didn't see or go all the way back to the truth. Can anyone else? Political pressure? Who knows? Okay, but at this point then, Jehoram does away with the Baal worship, still doesn't get people back together, and they're in that false religion area. Now, when we come down to the next section about Jehoshaphat joins Joram in an alliance, you've got the king of the north, you've got a divided kingdom, but they're going to make an alliance together. And why do adversaries make alliances together? Why do they look for each other's help? Why does the United States today, who is not really a friend of many nations out there, they're not really friends of, could we call Putin and Russia a close friend? Nope. We've got very few close allies here. We've got a lot that we associate with, but why does the United States, even if you go back to World War II, things weren't really tight between Russia and the United States during World War II. Matter of fact, if I recall correctly, one of our high-powered generals, after the defeat of Germany, wanted to turn north and go take on Russia after Russia had helped us defeat Germany. So they make alliances to because there's another enemy out there. And it goes back to the old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yes, sir. That's what you was going to say? So we're about to make an alliance here between basically two adversaries because of something else that's going on. Let's read a little bit, starting with verse 4. Mesha, king of Moab, was a sheep master and rendered unto the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and 100,000 rams with the wool. But it came to pass when Ahab was dead that the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. There's your enemy. Moab is just to the east of the Dead Sea, so they're neighbors there. And now the king of Israel and king of Judah, they have a common enemy. Ahab had been friends with him, but now things are different. Well, they paying tribute. He was. I don't want to get into politics today, but why does the United States government spend millions, billions, trillions of dollars sending aid to foreign countries that basically do no good? Now, I have personal firsthand experience of something that when Andrea and I were in the Philippines, Marcos was on the throne. Marcos had been in prison for murder, studied law, got himself out, got himself anointed president of the Philippines, and then became dictator of the Philippines. Didn't call it that, but that's what he was. And every time that they had some kind of disaster, weather-related or anything else, the United States would pump billions of dollars of aid over there to them. The only thing that we saw, because we were there, the helicopters would fly over and drop Nutriband, you know what that is, basically bread, out to them. The people would go downstream and pick up the sticks and bricks that had been their homes, and drag them back up and build another home, dirt floor. All the new equipment that came in was made in Japan. The United States is giving them all this money, but the equipment they're buying is coming from Japan. Roads didn't improve. Nothing improved except Marcos' bank account and Amelia's shoe collection. The United States government gave Marcos billions of dollars for his country, but it only went to Marcos. In my opinion, that is still happening today if you look at what's going on in the countries that we give aid to. And why is it? It's to try to buy favors, make peace. Yes, sir. Honduras. And we could go on with a few others. So, sorry I got into politics, but we are talking about kings and nations, so that deals a little bit with politics. So that's okay. We've beaten that one to death pretty much. Anything else along those lines? I forgot where I was. Verse 6, and King Jehoram went out of Samaria at the same time and numbered all Israel. And he went and sent to Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, saying, the king of Moab hath rebelled against me. Wilt thou go with me against Moab to battle? And he said, I will go up. I am as thou art, my people as thy people, and my horses as thy horses. And he said, which way shall we go up? And he answered, the way through the wilderness of Edom. So he didn't hesitate. King of the north asked the king of the south, will you join me in this battle against this common enemy? And he jumped right on board and say, I'm ready, let's go. And verse 9, so the king of Israel went, and the king of Judah, and the king of Edom. Okay, they picked up a third king, king of Edom. They fetched a compass of 7 days' journey, and there was no water for the host for the cattle that followed them. That gets down to question, we've just run through question 1, 2, and 3. Question 3 talks about what problems they confronted them. And one was in this valley, there was no water. They had picked a route that there should have been ample supply of water for them and the cattle, but I guess they just picked the wrong time of season, or they had a drought or whatever, because there was no water for them. Verse 10, and the king of Israel said, alas, that the Lord hath called these 3 kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab. But Jehoshaphat said, is there not here a prophet of the Lord, that we may inquire of the Lord by him? And one of the king of Israel's servants answered and said, here is Elisha, the son of Shaphat, which poured water on the hands of Elijah. And Jehoshaphat said, the word of the Lord is with him. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat and the king of Edom went down to him. And Elijah said unto the king of Israel, what have I to do with thee? Get thee to the prophets of thy father and to the prophets of thy mother. And the king of Israel said unto him, nay, for the Lord hath called these 3 kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab. And Elisha said, as the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, surely were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat the king of Judah, I would not look to thee nor see thee. That is a very important verse. Elisha the prophet said, as the Lord lives, before whom I stand, he's standing before the Lord, were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat. And who's Jehoshaphat? King of Judah, in the line of David. The supposedly true religion stayed with the kingdom of Judah. Were it not for the presence of Jehoshaphat, I, meaning God, would not even acknowledge them. To me, that's a powerful statement. Verse 15 says, but bring me a minstrel. And it came to pass, when the minstrel played, that the hand of the Lord came upon him, and he said, thus saith the Lord, make this valley full of ditches. Ditches or pits. In other words, they were to dig holes or dig trenches, and what would that be for? Water. So the water wouldn't run out of the valley, but collect in the valley for them. I'm going to skip down for sake of time, because I'm running a little way short on time. Drop down to verse 21. And when all the Moabites heard that the kings were come to fight against them, they gathered all that were able to put on armor and upward and stood in the border. And they rose up early in the morning, and the sun shone upon the water, and the Moabites saw the water on the other side as red as blood, and they said, this is blood, the kings are surely slain, and they have smitten one another. Now therefore Moab to the spoil. And when they came to the camp of Israel, the Israelites rose up and smote the Moabites, so that they fled before them. but they went forward, smiting the Moabites even into their country. So how was the battle won? Saw a vision, thought it was blood, misunderstood what they saw. Why would that be? Think the Lord had a hand in it? Lord was with Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat had Jehoram and the king of Edom in that alliance, and they knew they needed to, and they was asking for God's help to beat the Moabites. Wouldn't be surprised. That was the culture for many, well, even during the what's referred to as the Civil War, which technically is not the Civil War, it's the war between the states, but I'm going to get off that horse. During that war, there were still people raiding and taking spoils and looting, and it was all legitimate. It was after that the United States started to get their act together and tell the soldiers, be soldiers and not do that kind of thing. But anything else then on chapter 3?
It's impressive, it's predicted by the minstrel, the destruction, the level of destruction that they were going to reach upon Moab. It wasn't just go kill the people and we win. They tore down all the cities and they put stones in all the fields. They cut down all the good trees. They just laid waste to the whole place.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's one of the things I was going to talk about and forgot about. They cut down all the trees. Back in the book of Deuteronomy, they were told to not cut down what kind of trees? Fruit-bearing trees are things that would provide food. They could cut everything else but leave those alone. But here, they wasn't under that same restraint. They cleared the field. They cut down everything. This area was a pretty rocky area, so the farmers, they had to take the boulders and the rocks out, sort of like Ireland. That's why Ireland's got so many stone fences, and they had to take all the rocks out to clear the field so that they could grow stuff. And then the soldiers came in and did what? Took down the walls, took down the rock piles, strewn them out again, which now people that's going to do that, they got to start from scratch. So they cut down the fruit trees. Yep. And so they had to dig. They had to start from scratch. They had to dig the wells to get water. Trees. It was going to take fruit trees at least 5 years to be productive, even if they had moved a half-grown tree in. So they just totally annihilated that area. Anything else then? Just being spiteful. I do think, though, that today that sometimes we have a tendency to make war too sanitized. It's bad for anybody to die in war, but the United States, even during the period of Vietnam, many Americans got killed in Vietnam because they would not shoot at the enemy because the enemy was shielding themselves behind children and women and others. The United States is one of the few countries that try their best not to hurt innocent people, whereas others put the innocents right in front of them and hide behind them. In my opinion, even what was going on in the Middle East over there, Iraq and Iran, they were hiding behind the women. They were putting the women out. They were sending children out with bomb vests on. They're cowards. If you're not going to stand up and fight your own fight without hiding behind somebody that's innocent, you're a coward, plain and simple. That has nothing to do with our Bible study today. Let me get back. Chapter 4. There was a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets unto Elisha, saying, Thy servant, my husband, is dead, and thou knowest that thy servant did fear the Lord, and the creditor is come to take unto him my 2 sons to be bondmen. That happened even in the 1800s. If you couldn't pay your debt, you went to debtor's prison. Or even in America, when some of the people came from other places to America, immigrated to America, the rule was that they would sell themselves into bondage for 7 years. And at the end of that 7 years, they were going to be given a mule and a few supplies, and then they were free. And there were some that got to that point and had not been frugal enough or managed their money well enough. They couldn't get a start. So they turned around and sold themselves to somebody else for another 7 years. That was part of it. There was also the part that dealt with people that were enslaved totally. They had no way out until they could buy their freedom, and they couldn't buy their freedom because they couldn't make enough money. And so, but you get into a couple of situations like that. And like I say, even in the 1800s in America, there was such things as putting people into bondage to pay debts and things of that nature. 1700s, 1800s. So Elisha said unto her, What shall I do for thee? Now she had, we won't read this story, we'll just go over it a little bit. The only thing she had was a little bit of oil. Oil was used for many purposes, and the prophet told her then to go get some vessels. And as she poured oil from her vessel into other vessels, they filled up. So she had a lot of oil now, and he told her to do what with that oil? Go sell it, pay off the creditor, and everything will be good to go. Now let's drop down to verse 8. It fell on a day that Elisha passed to Shunem, where was a great woman. Shunem was one of the cities or one of the tribes of Issachar. And what does it mean by a great woman? Sorry? Noble? Noble? And what does that mean? Well, that is normally what it means, but if you take a look at the rest of it and read it in context, she was a pious woman. She was very religious. She was great in that respect. She constrained him to eat bread, and as often as he passed, he turned in. It was her that caused her husband to set up a chamber for him so he would always have a place to stay as he went on his, passed by and went on his visit. Verse 9, she said unto her husband, Behold now, I perceive that this is a holy man of God which passed by continually. Let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall, and let us set for him there a bed and a table and a stool and a candlestick. So this great woman being pious, religious, saw this prophet go by and made a place for him to stay. What did he do in return for her? Apparently, she's old enough that she's not childbearing, and all of a sudden, the prophet tells her that she's going to have a child, and she sort of scoffs at it. Who else scoffed when God told them they was going to have a child in their old age? Sarah. But it came about, and she did have a child. And then as the child grew up and got a little bit older, what happened? Child got sick and died. There's many that speculate on this because it said the child had gone to the field to be with the father and started complaining of a headache, went back, sat on the mother's lap, and then died. Much of the speculation is that the child died of a heat stroke. Well, severe headaches are one sign of a heat stroke, but there is nothing in this Bible that tells me that that child got sick and died of a heat stroke. What it does tell me is that the child had a headache, the child died, and then what happened? This woman of faith put the child on the prophet's bed. Why would she put the child on the prophet's bed? We're going to speculate a little bit, but I think we can draw some pretty sound conclusions from it. Why did she put the child on the prophet's bed? Getting it close to the man of God. The man of God laid on this bed. That's where I'm going to put my child. Then she went to get Elisha, and what happened from that point? Prior to that, she goes to get Elisha, but what does Elisha do first? Sorry? He sent someone ahead that was not to delay. Go straight way, don't stop. I'm paraphrasing now because we're a little short on time, but basically, you go straight there, don't let anything hinder you, and do what? Place the staff on the child's face. Then when he shows up, he goes and lays down on the child. Well, before that, what did he do? He prayed. He prayed, and then he lay down on the child. And what was the result? Child came back to life. I'm sorry? He sneezed 7 times and woke up. That is an interesting fact. Why? And again, speculation, we don't know why. But if you'll notice, all through Scripture, there's certain numbers that come up over and over and over again. The numbers 3, 7, 40. Those just repeat through the Scripture. So the child was restored to his health. We way behind, but we ain't not going anywhere.
Interesting, she got a donkey and a servant to go with her. Basically, put the hammer down and don't let up for anything unless I tell you. It's almost 20 miles to Mount Carmel from where she was at. And she didn't know for a fact that he was over there. At least you can kind of read between the lines. She wasn't sure that's where he was, but had a good idea. That's a long trip to take in a short amount of time, obviously.
Yeah, and why do you think she told the servant what she did? You don't stop unless I tell you to. Why do you think she had to tell him that?
I guess he would typically slow down for the horses or for the donkey, whatever the animal was. These times that you need to let rest, things of that nature, administrative tasks.
Let's look at it a different way. At her age, if you and your mother go out in the woods to take a walk, what are you going to do? But typically the man will slow down for and here she says, "You book it. I'm with you." And since you made that comment there, and probably Jeremy's done the same thing in his military time, there have been times that the men lag behind and the women are right there.
I've seen some that said that the boy was at home, busy watching head.
Yeah.
It says multiple times the boy's head and he was cold.
Sort of reminds you then of when we get into the New Testament, Lazarus. He was definitely dead. He'd already started smelling. He'd been in that grave 4 days. But he was brought back to life whole. So here, I take the Bible at its word. The child died. There was no life in the child. When there's no life in a body, loses heat, cold. Now he's brought back to life by the prophet through prayer. So it wasn't the prophet that brought him back to life. It was God, but it was God working through the prophet. Jeremy's already got up to ring the bell, and we've got about 3 minutes. But if we look at verse, or in the questions, it said, how did Elisha restore? We did that. And then we get down to the last part of it. It says, what miracle did Elisha perform at Gilgal? And if we start with verse 38 in this section, 38 of chapter 4, says, Elisha came again to Gilgal, and there was a dearth in the land, and the sons of the prophets were sitting before him. And he said unto his servant, set on the great pot and see the pottage for the sons of the prophets. And one went out into the field to gather herbs and found a wild vine and gathered there of wild gourds his lap full and came and shred them into the pot of pottage, for they knew them not. You can't eat just anything out in the woods. You got to be careful what you pick up. Apparently by them not knowing what they was picking up, they was picking up some stuff that wasn't supposed to be eaten. I don't like mushrooms. I'm not going to eat a mushroom unless it's just there and I can't avoid it much. But I would never go out to pick a mushroom because there's some that are poisonous and will kill you. And I don't know one from the other. The only reason I know the names of mushrooms is the few times that I've sauteed some for Andrea, because she'll eat anything that don't eat her. The only reason I knew the name was I read it on the package. But they went out and gathered this stuff and didn't know it, and they poured out for the men to eat. And it came to pass as they were eating that they cried out and said, O man of God, there is death in the pot. So they had cooked something that wasn't supposed to be eaten. And then Elisha said, bring meal, and he cast it into the pot and said, pour out for the people. And they ate, and there was no harm in the pot. So again, God through Elisha solved the problem. The food was now good to eat and not bad to eat. The last thing in the last question is describe how Elisha miraculously fed 100 people, and compare this miracle with the feeding of the multitudes by Jesus. There are several sections of reading there, but to summarize, how did he do it? Pardon? Power of God. They had a little bit, and they just started passing it out, and for some reason it just kept multiplying, and everybody had enough to eat. We've made it through both chapters. Any questions or comments, since Jeremy should be ringing the bell just about any minute? Questions, comments? Well, thank y'all so much, and I'll go back there now and let Andrea beat on my head for me talking about her.